Welcome everyone to our learning session today on plain language. I'm really excited to be here with my colleague Daniela, as well as colleagues from the Service Design Collective group, including Shelley Smith. I will pass it off to them soon to introduce themselves, but first, a few words from our wonderful National WIC Association partner, Christina.
Thanks, Martell. Hi, everyone. I think I know most folks on here, but good to see folks, and hope you had a good and relaxing holiday. I'm just really I'm here to learn myself, but also I think that the plain language piece is something that is really exciting and really important as we think about accessibility for potential participants, and making the program guidelines as clear as we can so that we can maximize enrollment and engagement with the program. And some of you are probably familiar, we do have a WIC technology group that the National WIC Association co-convenes with NAVA. And so we support this type of work, this type of learning on using technology to maximize WIC participant experience. And so just keep an eye out. We've published some stuff on the hub. We'll continue to have some of these learning sessions as we move into the new year, and really excited about some of the stuff we have coming down the pike. So NAVA, for those of you that don't know, I'm sure Martell will do a sort of broader introduction, but NAVA is a public benefit corporation that has done a lot of work in social services and accessibility. And so I think that it's really exciting to have them here. And then also Service Design Collective has been doing a lot of this really nascent work, and is really exciting to bring their expertise around sort of how to make those programs accessible. So I'm just excited to be here, and we'll turn it over to Martell to get the session started.
Yeah, thanks, Christina. And I'm just going to turn it right back to Daniela and Sherry Shelley. I apologize. I have a neighbor named Sherry, and so brain was going to a little different place there. But yeah, happy to turn it over to Daniela and Shelley to introduce themselves and kick us off. Daniela.
Thanks, yeah. Can you hear me? Cool. Just really quickly going over our agenda before we kick off. We'll do some introductions. I already did our welcome. We're going to go over plain language and how that kind of fits into the broader thing we call content strategy, a little bit about WIC demographics, using plain language. We're also going to go through some examples, and then we'll have a breakout activity towards the end of the session today, and then we'll regroup and have time for questions. And then I'll introduce myself now. My name is Daniela DeBera. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a senior designer researcher at NAVA, and I'm also the design lead on our WIC projects. We just finished up our demonstration project, and we're kicking off our new project now. And I'm based in San Francisco. And I'll pass it to Shelley to introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. Pleased to meet you. My name is Shelley Smith, and I am with the Service Design Collective, a relatively new public benefit organization. And we recently completed a very comprehensive content audit of the WIC entity's web presence around several different things, several different points. And today, Daniela and I will be sharing with you readability and plain language, and the importance of making things really accessible and easy to read. So thank you so much.
I had to find my mute button. So first, we're going to talk about plain language and how it fits into broader content strategy. So first, let's talk about content strategy. What is it? It's the practice of planning for, designing, and managing user content. So if we unpack that a little bit, thinking about any type of writing project, you would typically undergo some sort of planning phase, defining those goals, outlining what it is that you need to write, and then implementing that plan. That is all part of content strategy. It's similar to editorial strategy and marketing in that some of it is figuring out who your audiences are, how you can cater whatever you need to say to them so that it's easy and understandable for them to understand what they should do. And you're developing a story that entices them and is convincing. It's also similar to user experience design, that we are really centering the user and trying to understand their needs so that the content that we develop can meet them where they are. And we use writing and principles from information sciences to support achieving the outcomes that we want to with our content. And the goal of content strategy is really to create useful and clear and concise content that is in order to improve the overall user experience of all of your materials. And then we've linked it here, and we have a bunch of resources linked at the end as well. ATNF has a really great content guide that they published a few years ago. In there, they outlined how US government websites are for everyone. So content that the websites contain should be as straightforward as possible. I said websites, but it's really all general content, written stuff that's not just on the web as well. Today, we are focusing on one aspect of content strategy, which is plain language. And plain language is also sometimes called plain writing or plain English, but it's all the same way of saying a way in which you can communicate with your audience in a way that they will easily understand what you are trying to say the first time they read or hear that content. In 2010, the federal government actually approved the Plain Writing Act. And the full title of that act is an act to enhance citizen access to government information and services by establishing that government documents issued to the public must be written clearly or for other purposes. But everyone calls it the Plain Writing Act. And in that act, the plain language is defined as writing that is clear, concise, well organized, and follows other best practices appropriate to the subject or field and intended audience. So material will be in plain language if someone in your audience can first find what they need. This refers to both navigating to find that content and then finding something specific within a body of content. Secondly, material is in plain language if someone can understand what it is the first time they hear or read it. Sorry, I'm a little distracted by the waiting room notifications. Third, if your audience can use what they find to meet their needs. So reflecting back, being able to locate a key message, understanding that key message, and then being able to use or act on that key message. And just a note also, it's important to remember that language that is plain or normal to some of your readers may not be plain to others. We're going to talk about that a lot today in terms of the jargon that we use and what participants may actually understand. And then why is plain language important? First of all, plain language focuses on clear and concise content, which makes it easier to read and understand. People will have greater focus with plain language, and this will overall save user and staff time. If users can easily locate and understand the key messages of what they're reading, they'll need less hands-on support interpreting that content, interpreting jargon, or needing other help navigating that information. And this will in turn save staff from having to do heavier customer service. It's also easier to maintain from a content management perspective. So using plain language should result in overall less content that you would develop. And then if you would need to do something like make an edit, it should be easier to locate and make that edit. Additionally, plain language is more accessible. Accessibility interpreted a number of ways here. It's easier for things like screen readers to parse less content. It's also more meaningful It's more meaningful and easier to translate plain language for localization purposes. And then lastly, plain language can help people complete tasks. Understanding a reader's need and writing content that addresses that specific need will result in more action. All right, I'm going to hand it off to Shelley to walk us through some WIC demographics at a glance.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. So this is all census data, and it's linked directly in the resources for the slideshow here. But we just wanted to kind of give an overview of plain language and kind of the level of education as well as familiarity with English. So these are census statistics, and what we generally hear, and this has been like a standard for a very long time, is 8th grade level of reading. I want to give some caution around that because generally what we're talking about is writing for your audience. So that can mean that if you're writing a really scientifically focused paper, you might write at a different level than you write for general benefits. So just in thinking that many households in the United States don't speak English as their first language at home. Many WIC participants were born outside of the United States, so they might not have been born into an English-speaking community. And we'll talk about this a little bit more later. Folks might not even have a lot of reference to even having benefits from the government. So understanding that folks come from a really wide variety of backgrounds and educational resources. So plain language really speaks to understandability. And as Daniela kind of referred to earlier as well, there's the translation and localization services. So things like being able to translate things into languages more easily. And plain language really facilitates that, especially when you're thinking about machine translation. So just thinking that not everyone has a higher level of education or has familiarity kind of natively with English as a language or more complex terms. So, okay. All right, so using plain language, we're going to go through some of the principles here of what plain language is and what we mean by plain language, readability, and other concepts. So some of the basics are writing for your audience. So again, kind of really understanding who you are writing for and understanding what kind of terms and levels they would really absorb well. How are they reading this? Are they reading this on a phone? Are they reading this with perhaps a bunch of little ones all around them, being very distracting? Are they reading this in advanced months of pregnancy where they might be really uncomfortable? So thinking about all the different ways someone might be reading: small screen, large screen, older laptop, all of those things. And also, like, what are they trying to do? What is the things that they're trying to accomplish when they're reading your content? So some of these things are just focusing folks on a single topic, writing things that are fact-based. So really sticking to, these are kind of the steps to get you to where you need to go, removing unrelated information. So including things like warnings or banners or additional information that might not be completely relevant to the topic at hand, and using a really good personal voice. This is something that I think the government in general can really work a lot more on, is being more personal, using active voice, using present tense, and using a really positive tone. Daniela, what do you have to add?
I think another thing to add here is avoiding judgment and loaded terms, especially when you're talking about a population of people themselves. We talk a lot about like demographics, and some of the ways in which we talk about demographics may not be as appropriate for an actual beneficiary themselves, for example. So that would be something else that I would say here. I think part of also the writing for your audience, we think about something like WIC, which is called Women, Infants, and Children, but we know that there's authorized representatives who maybe don't fall into one of those categories. So thinking about how can we make language inclusive so that an a potential audience member does identify, hey, this is something that I could apply for and benefit from, even though they are not potentially a woman, a child, or an infant, right? So things like that, broadening to make sure that you do reach all the appropriate folks that you are trying to reach.
Excellent, thank you. So here's an example. So this is a pretty standard language that I've seen on WIC pages. I believe this one, we have some folks in from Idaho today. This is from Idaho's website. We'll be revisiting it again later in the presentation. But writing for readability, we get into this more too, is also being specific. So making sure that you're really clear about the concepts you're coming across, and writing for scannability. So in this particular example, there's an approved foods list and then authorized food. There's two pretty complex terms that are actually used to refer to the same thing or similar concepts. Even switching between those can be a bit confusing. So being really straightforward, you can use WIC to buy these things, and then breaking them into a list that's easy to scan. So if you're looking for a specific thing like milk or baby formula, you can actually find it in there to understand what you can use the benefit to buy. So this is just an example of rewriting something that might be in a format that's less easy to scan and has complex words into a bit clearer terms. And again, it's not perfect. There can even be, I think, better writing for this. And so designing for readability, so just how we kind of broke that paragraph of text into a bulleted list that would be really easy to scan, especially on a phone or an iPad or a smaller screen, possibly at the grocery store where you have really harsh, bright lights coming down on you. There's all kinds of formatting that you can do and style choices that you can make to make things a lot more readable. So one of the things that I think that we have to keep in mind is that most people don't read everything on a page. They actually read very little. So in the resources at the end of this presentation, there's an older study, but one that's very good from a well-respected design organization called Nielsen Norman that talks about how much people actually read and how they can skip over certain things, especially stuff that looks like ads, like banners, or really informationally dense graphics. So think about how you can actually format your page to make it really easily scannable. So making sure that you use headings to organize your content. That's also really important for accessibility. So for folks who are using screen readers or who might be looking at things with really big text or increased text size, being able to actually have a organized content that's kind of in an outline format so that they could skip to the part of the page that they need. Writing in short paragraphs, breaking things into lists so they're really easy to scan, especially on mobile devices, and of course, making it mobile friendly. Using legible styles like high contrast colors, again, thinking about all the different environments that someone might be looking at your content. So they might be looking at it, again, like in the bright sunlight in a grocery store, or I'm based in Seattle and it's quite dark in the wintertime, so in really low light conditions as well. Choosing readable font styles and making text just in itself big enough to read on its own without having to adjust browser size, which can be difficult on different devices. And then avoiding distracting design elements. So like banners, warnings, and alerts. So things that might overwhelm someone or push content way down pages. Providing text explanations for information graphics. So if you think about, you put a graphic that might look really, really nice on a desktop machine into a web page, but on a mobile device, it might render really small. So you would need to actually have an explanation. So whatever is in the actual graphic would be in an explanation, and using your decorative elements wisely. So making sure that you don't over decorate pages or use lots of creative colors or graphics that might change page rendering. So there's all kinds of things that you can do that help with legibility and just being able to read and scan really quickly, because most folks will be looking for kind of a specific set of information. Do you have anything to add, Daniela?
I would just add on infographics, if someone's using a screen reader, the screen reader can't read any text within a graphic, which is why it's doubly important to make sure that all images have alt text, which is something that your IT team can help you do, and like a caption that explains what's actually going on there. So that's just another thing that can sometimes be a barrier to folks understanding, especially if it's something like a specific process that's really important that needs to be written out, not just as a graphic.
So I have a before and after example here from the National Archives. I also have this linked in our notes at the end. So they have lots and lots of different examples that I think are really good as a visual demonstration for what we're talking about. So this was their before page for preservation. So this was all about kind of giving you information about how the National Archives preserves things and steps that you can do to preserve your own archive. As you can see, this page has a lot of different things that are going on here. So it has, for example, you can see that kind of barely there's a let there be light, but it's really blurry. So that's kind of an idea of a distracting graphic. So it's hard to read. The text is really light blue. You don't really have a title on this page or anything that tells you what the information is on this page. It starts very much in kind of strings of text, so you're not really given the context of the page of what it's about in a scannable way. And then there's a video immediately in the middle of the page that kind of breaks out the content. So let's look at the after. So in the after, you can see that it has direct action-oriented things. It has links broken down into bulleted lists that you can scan. And I actually think that this page could probably still use some improvements. So just kind of observing here, what do you think could probably be improved? For me, I can see that the graphics for the little boxes are quite small, so that might be something that you might not necessarily want to include in future versions of your page, or include them in a different way. So there are still places to be improved here, but this, you can see that this already has a lot more direction of what do you want to preserve, how we preserve things, and really tells you where to go and what to do next. So, and of course, keep it simple. So using simple words and phrases, so avoiding jargon, slang, overly complex words, using acronyms sparingly, or if you do need to use an acronym, always spelling it out first on the page and defining what it is, using everyday words with clear meanings. This again really helps with translation. So there are lots of different ways things get translated. And one of the things I have worked in various levels of government. So at the city, at the state, and at the federal level, and worked on a variety of projects, including with folks who are new residents of the United States. And a lot of times what happens with folks who are might be English as a second language is that younger individuals in the household will actually translate on behalf of older individuals. So you might actually have a child or a teenager translating on behalf of parents or grandparents. A lot of WIC entities have machine translation available too, so they might not have directly translatable documents, so things like in other languages, but they might have Google Translate. And the simpler your terms are and the more everyday your terms are, the easier it is to actually translate that. So when kind of looking at your page for simple language, think about if an 8-year-old was trying to explain this to their parent, would they be able to explain this properly? Or if someone ran this through Google Translate, would this actually be interpreted correctly? I also have another example of when I worked for a nonprofit here in Seattle. We had transportation services for older adults, and we called them senior shuttles. And the word shuttle is not, necessarily the standard, right? You could say like van rides for seniors or something a lot more simple. And what we were finding is that people were very confused because when they translated it into different languages, the word shuttle was being translated as like space shuttle rather than like van shuttle. So folks were like, I'm not sure what this is. This talks about going to space. So that's just an example of how even like using a simpler term, like you can call us to ride our van, and here's a picture of a van, really made improvements on people being able to understand the services that we offered. So it's also writing for action. So focusing your content on a specific goal, giving folks next steps. What do they need to do next? And also giving them what they need to act. So if they need to have a document or they need to know a specific income level, actually being able to get that full information so they can take next steps. And just explaining what you mean, avoiding long definitions, but using more simple terms, breaking down complex concepts, and not assuming folks know what you are talking about. I think that this is really important. So when I was working with the city of Seattle, we were working with some refugee and immigrant populations from Somalia and Eritrea. And those folks actually don't really have strong government support in their home country. So the very concept of the government helping you and providing these services was not very familiar to folks. So we can't even assume that people will kind of understand what the government provides in context. So really, that's one of the wonderful things about keeping it really simple and straightforward is that you can say, yes, we provide these things for you. They're free. So all of those kind of really important concepts that we might assume, but we shouldn't. And Daniela, what do you have to add?
I think something that we see a lot is under the example of giving people what they need to act. Sometimes we'll reference like, oh, you need this form or you need this document or bring this in, and it won't be specific enough for somebody to actually know what to do, right? So we can like link to that specific document that they can print out and fill out, or we can link to a list of here are all the example things that you could bring in that would prove this category of eligibility, for example. Thinking about how we can prepare folks as best as possible. Those are the types of actions that I think are super meaningful as well here. Yeah.
Excellent. So here is just one of the examples. This is San Francisco. So this is the city of San Francisco's COVID vaccine website. And you can see that it's very straightforward and very, very, very simple. So it has all kinds of really good information. It has alerts that don't overwhelm. It says vaccinations are free. So again, don't assume folks know that because generally healthcare in the United States is not free. So that's a really good thing to say. And who can get vaccines and where you can get it. What we also wanted to point out here is that the mobile site and the desktop site, they match each other. So you would be surprised that sometimes mobile websites do not match content or format with desktop sites. So these say the same things, they say it in the same order, they say it in the same way, which is really helpful to be able to get folks to the goal here, which is to get vaccinated. So, and here's the website that you can check out if you want to look at it on your own device. All right, so the next part here is that those are some kind of general examples of our concepts. We're going to dig a little bit into the WIC readability and plain language issues that both Daniela and I have seen in our time at WIC. These are more kind of trends that we've seen across time and across different organizations and different web pages, just knowing that also that a lot of times these things vary even within an organization. So WIC, as we've even been calling it WIC, uses many acronyms. Sometimes we don't always spell those out. So I think that one of the really prevalent examples of this is that of food assistance programs, so things like SNAP and TAMF, and those acronyms appear a lot on pages. The they're commonly called food stamps, even though the stamp is no longer really used. And what is especially complex about this is that different states will actually have different names for some of their nutrition programs too. So just making sure to spell those out and really be clear about what you mean and using the common language around it. Jargon and complex words. So WIC pages, many WIC pages have uncommon words, longer words, WIC specific terms that can confuse people. The one that I saw over and over again, which is part of the actual WIC legal language and requirements language, is postpartum. So postpartum is often, if you actually Google postpartum, you'll see that almost all of the results will say something around the lines of postpartum depression. So it's not super commonly used to mean that you just had a baby. Usually people say, I just had a baby. So that I think is one of the examples of how complex words, and that might not translate also very well, both with machine translation or with a secondhand translation of family translation. So something to think about as the words that, if you want to or have to use a legal term, understanding to actually also rephrase it in a more common way. So yeah, so I have an example of that one specifically, but there are lots of different ones. And then just missing or unclear explanations. So you have to meet rules to get WIC, and making sure that you're really clear about what those rules are, and explaining them in plain terms is really helpful to get folks started on their journey. So just things like 185% of the poverty line, or the poverty level, or something to that effect. Folks don't usually know what that kind of baseline is. So giving like numbers, for example, is really helpful. If you make this much or less, and really rephrasing those. So again, you can say that is what your requirement is, and then explain it in plainer terms so that folks can say, okay, this is what I should do, I should check. So.
Just to add on to that, I think something that we've seen is that when somebody doesn't understand something, like for example, the income limits, especially phrased in terms of the poverty line, they may not being able to interpret that for themselves might be a blocker to them even choosing to apply, which is, losing out on potential benefits for that person. So we want to make sure that we provide rules in a way that allows people to opt in, allows people to be like, yes, okay, now I understand and I can move forward. Similar to what we were talking about before with being able to take action. We don't want any of these things to be like a closed door. If someone is confused, rather they should help make that more clear so that people understand how they can move forward.
Yeah, so what we've also seen is that the WIC formatting can be, on some pages, can be hard to scan. So just multiple banners and warnings. This is definitely a trend that I saw across pages. So we are still, unfortunately, in our COVID-19 pandemic. So a lot of just across states or across government websites, there are various alerts that have to do with COVID. Unfortunately, we also had a baby formula recall and shortage. So lots of alerts and information that was very much needed about that as well. But what can happen is that so much of that can start to overwhelm folks or cause them to not know really where to start looking for for information or kind of abandoned that page because it seems like it's just warnings. So there's a phenomenon, this is called banner blindness. So folks tend to ignore things that look like banners. It's something we're very well trained with in our general browsing. So we just ignore kind of like the ads that might be on the page, and those warnings can often be in places where ads would traditionally go. I would invite you to think about how much attention you've paid next time to the many cookie warnings, or we're collecting cookie information that you get from pretty much every website. How much do you click OK and just completely, or don't click anything at all and just browse without it? Large blocks of text can also be an issue. So again, and thinking about, especially on smaller screens, so phones, scanning and actually trying to get through the text to see what the piece of information you specifically need can be a challenge. Also heading usage, so making sure to organize information like you would an outline. So using your heading tags, and this is something that if you have a web designer or an IT department, they can kind of help you with the formatting of your page, but really formatting it so that it has an order. And this is not just an ability to scan so that folks can scan your page like an outline to find the piece of information they want. It's also, again, an accessibility issue because screen readers allow people to tab through headings to get to the piece of information that they need. And then text styles, particularly small fonts and light colors are definitely a trend. And this can be from a variety of sources or reasons, but those really impact readability. If you think about actually looking at a page, if something is really small and it doesn't scale onto mobile devices, or if it's really light and you're in high contrast or extremely low contrast conditions like a dark room or bright sunshine, you might not even be able to see that. And also things, especially on desktop machines or laptop machines, column width. So making sure that your columns are small enough that people can actually read and scan, but not so narrow that they're kind of like, I kind of think about as like old school newspapers where the column widths are really, really narrow, and it just like shows you too much information on one page. So just thinking about making sure that you have a really good size for your columns, and making sure that when folks are looking at smaller screens, they can actually really scan very quickly.
And some of the guidelines around that are in some of the resources we've included at the end, but typically you're looking for 12 to 15 words across a column of text as like one line in the column.
Yeah, and then just making sure that you're really careful about your infographics. So many WIC pages, particularly with income information, will have information graphics or images that are the only source of complex information. So again, if you're looking at a smaller screen that might render really too small to read, and it would make you pinch or have to zoom in or side scroll to actually get to the content. It's also really good to break that information out of the graphic, again, as not just a readability, but an accessibility thing as well. So knowing when screen readers are reading alt tags, very few of the infographics actually have alt tags that say things like, this is, the income table, the following income breaks down like so. So it's really very important that when you have an infographic that you bring an explanation with it, especially since someone might look at the graphic, and we also have different ways of kind of reading and absorbing information. So someone might look at the graphic and that will get their attention, but the text might help them actually absorb or even copy paste the information. Think about how many times you're copying and pasting information to send to other folks via text or other methods. Distracting design elements, so making sure that you use your design wisely, use your images, your photographs, and your graphics really wisely so that they don't end up breaking up formats. One of the things that I saw a lot on various WIC pages is that the photographs that would be on pages don't scale well on mobile. So they'd either be too small to actually really see what they are, or they wouldn't scale properly and they cause you to kind of like do that wavy side scrolling thing that happens when you scroll down something on a mobile device. So really thinking about your placement, also placing graphics so that it might not be at the very beginning of a paragraph where that's where we start to read as in English. So thinking about how you actually use your design elements. And then using PDFs really wisely. I saw a lot of linking of PDFs, especially for income information, and those render very, very small in mobile devices. So again, those kind of force you to pinch and zoom in and can be difficult to use or just difficult to read on smaller screens. Depending on your desktop or your laptop, it may not open correctly depending on your plugins. Most modern browsers do open PDFs natively, but some might initiate a download depending on your settings. So just being really wise about how you give information and recognizing that a lot of folks will be coming on their mobile devices, will be using older machines. They might be on a machine that they don't have actual access to download things from, so they might not actually have that permission. So just thinking a lot about that. All right, so I know we have some Idaho folks on here today, so I wanted to give you all a shout out as a good example of some plain language. So one of the great things about the Idaho page is that the information, as you can see, is broken up into lists. They're really easy to scan. Thank you for linking that up, Daniela. And there's heading usage. So you see that we have like, it says apply, here's eligibility, here's your steps to apply. The income information is easy to scan. So it's in a mobile friendly format, a table format. It also doesn't overwhelm folks with too much information. It goes up to a household size of 4 and then gives you the formula to actually add more people beyond that. This has really good color and font choices, high contrast, easy to read. Column width is easy to scan, and this renders really well on mobile devices. So you can see that this is a really good example. And the income table is actually also provided in a PDF, but it's provided in a PDF in a way that you can actually zoom in on your phone to use it, which I thought was really nice, so that it wasn't really small and it didn't force you to download or go to a desktop computer to see it, or pinch and pinch and pinch to see it. So this is just a really good example of formatting that facilitates scanning and it gives you next steps. It has a lot of really good positive things about it. And then there's good use of plain language here too. So postpartum is used on this page. So but there's also an explanation here. So it says women who have had a baby in the last 6 months. So it's used both in the top explanation and then later defined clearly in plain language, which I thought was really, really nice. I also really like the pregnant woman equals 2 people. That is, I think, a concept that can be actually quite complex and hard to convey. So I like that it was just like, if you're pregnant, you're 2 people, the end. So, and I like that there was limited data for the income, because a lot of individuals or a lot of pages actually have a ton of income data on there. And this was nice just to say like up to a family of 4, and then you can add more, and then there is more information elsewhere. And there's next steps to apply. You know what to do next from here too. So you look at a glance, you say, okay, these are the things that make me eligible. What can I do next? So I really liked this particular page for the usage of plain language and kind of breaking down the terms. I thought this was a good example.
Now I'm going to walk us through an example from Montana, which is a state that we're working with for our next project, designing an open source participant recertification portal. So how did we apply plain language to some of our outreach materials? First, just to give some context, our goal was to recruit WIC participants to form an advisory council that we'd be working with over the next few months. And we wanted to work with clinic staff to do hands-on recruitment of WIC participants, and we needed to generate some materials to support them. You know, some of them are on the call today, so shout out to you. So we needed staff or flyers to share that contextual information that they needed in order for them to help with the recruitment. And then we also needed materials for participants. So this would be things that participants would see via social media or other avenues like printed flyers. And then we also needed these flyers to communicate our asks, give that actionable next step, as well as expectations so that folks would know what they needed to do next. So just focusing on this staff-facing flyer first. The language is written not at an 8th grade reading level, but at a level and with the jargon that we know that staff understand. They're familiar with this jargon, and the breakdown of things like these participant groups are in bullets here. We know that they understand those things. The content is broken up into some short paragraphs at the top and then lists and bullet points. We're keeping type design in mind throughout, so type size, how we're using bold and color type in order to draw the eye towards the headlines and the main messages. And then because we knew that this was going to be shared via email attachments and potentially printouts, we have it as a PDF here so that it can be easily shareable throughout the clinics. When we were working on the participant-facing materials, they look a little bit different. First, we used an online application called Hemingway, which I definitely recommend to ensure that all of the written content was at an 8th grade reading level. But additionally, we also focused on having like primary and secondary content super clearly. You can see we also highlighted the CTAs in purple so that was kind of like an underlying like gravity on these graphics that your page went towards. That's what we want to drive people to action towards. We also bolded other important information like the fact that there's a paid stipend. From a format perspective, we thought about that this could be printed. So there is a PDF and that's what you see in the background. And we also thought about how something like this might work on social media, specifically for Facebook. So that first image that you see in the foreground is a social media friendly graphic. And we formatted this more for Facebook than another social media platform because we asked outreach staff what would be most useful for them. How would you post this? And, you know, do you want a short link? Do you want a QR code? Like we asked them those things and that drove why the decisions that we made in these materials.